I may have bitten off more than I can chew with this one. 36 Ottoman Sultans? In 36 minutes? Yeah, I said challenge accepted and immediately regretted it.
Oh, this is too much. I can't do this.
Somehow I survived, and so will you. It's chaotic, dramatic, occasionally unhinged, but
You're gonna love it!
Ertuğrul Bey's eldest son, Gündüz, was expected to lead. His middle son, Savcı, was also a key figure. But the youngest, Osman, would defy expectations and carve his name into history. Unlike his brothers, Osman sought more than just leadership. He sought purpose. He undertook a 40-day vision quest, an intense spiritual journey that revealed his destiny. One night, he dreamt of a tree sprouting from his chest, its branches stretching across continents, shading the world. To some, it was just a dream. To Osman, it was fate calling. But fate alone doesn't build empires. Osman gained the support of Sheikh Edebali by marrying his daughter, Rabia Bala Hatun, strengthening his spiritual authority. He later wed Malhun Hatun, whose noble lineage secured powerful tribal alliances. When he took the sacred sword, it wasn't just tradition, it was a declaration of what was to come. In battle, he was ruthless yet deliberate. After capturing Karacahisar in 1288, he spared its Christian priests, setting a precedent for religious tolerance that would define the empire. His enemies feared him, calling him Kara Osman, the Dark Warrior, a name he embraced to instill psychological fear. By the time he took his last breath in 1326, his rusted belt, a symbol of years of battle and struggle, came full circle. Osman had done more than lead, he had turned a vision into a legacy. And who better to carry it forward than his son, a man ready to turn ambition into action? Osman may have dreamed the empire, but Orhan, his son, brought that dream to life. He didn't waste time. In 1326, Orhan captured Bursa, turning it into the first Ottoman capital. It wasn't just a military win, it was a turning point. Streets were planned, markets organized, and mosques rose. For the first time, the Ottomans were thinking like a state. Then came the coins. Orhan minted the first Ottoman currency, a bold move that declared, "We're here to stay." But he wasn't all swords and silver. Orhan married Theodora, a Byzantine princess. That alliance opened doors, softened borders, and showed that diplomacy could be just as powerful as conquest. His rule was calm, steady, and smart. He built an army, a treasury, and an identity. What Osman envisioned, Orhan began to shape with structure. With the foundation laid, the next sultan would face the challenge of protecting and expanding this growing state. If Osman dreamed it and Orhan built it, Murad I took it beyond the map. Ambitious and relentless, Murad moved the capital to Edirne, shifting the empire's focus toward Europe. It wasn't just geography, it was strategy. From there, he launched decisive campaigns, including the crushing Battle of Maritsa, turning the Balkans into Ottoman territory. But Murad wasn't just a warrior, he was a visionary. He founded the Janissaries, an elite corps of loyal, trained soldiers who would define Ottoman military power for centuries. And behind the battlefield, he was building a state. Murad laid the foundation for the Ottoman administrative system, giving structure to the growing empire. Then came Kosovo. Victory was his, but it came at a cost. Murad was assassinated on the battlefield, becoming the first Ottoman sultan to die in combat. But his sacrifice wasn't in vain. His successor would take the Ottomans to an entirely new level of power. They called him Yildirim Bayezid. The Thunderbolt wasn't here to play. His lightning-fast campaigns expanded Ottoman control across the Balkans and Anatolia. In 1396, he crushed a massive crusader army at Nicopolis, a victory so decisive that it sent shockwaves through Europe. But Bayezid wasn't just about speed, he was about dominance. He besieged Constantinople multiple times, even constructing Anadolu Hisarı, a fortress still standing today, to choke the city's supply lines. Yet despite his efforts, the city remained unconquered. His ambition didn't stop there. Bayezid aggressively annexed neighboring Muslim emirates, justifying his actions with religious decrees. However, this expansion antagonized Timur, Tamerlane, leading to their fateful clash at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. The battle was a disaster. Timur's forces outmaneuvered Bayezid's, cutting off water supplies and exploiting desertions within the Ottoman ranks. Bayezid was captured, the only Ottoman sultan ever taken prisoner. Though legends speak of his humiliation in a cage, contemporary accounts suggest he was treated with a measure of respect. Bayezid died in captivity in 1403, plunging the empire into an 11-year civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum. The Ottomans were in turmoil, but from the ashes, a determined son would rise to restore order. After Bayezid's catastrophic defeat, the Ottoman Empire fractured into chaos. For over a decade, Mehmed IV battled his brothers in a brutal civil war, emerging victorious in 1413. He didn't just reunite the empire, he rebuilt it from the ground up. Mehmed re-established control over western Anatolia and subdued the Karaman Principality in Konya. In the Balkans, he restored the vassal system in Bulgaria and Serbia, promising not to undertake new European adventures. But his challenges weren't only external. In 1416, a charismatic Sufi theologian, Sheikh Bedreddin, led a populist religious movement promoting social equality and syncretism. Mehmed swiftly suppressed the revolt, executing Bedreddin in 1420. To secure his son's succession, Mehmed took drastic measures. He blinded his nephew Orhan Çelebi and sent his own sons as hostages to the Byzantine court. Mehmed's reign was brief, but his impact was profound. He stabilized the empire, laying the foundation for future expansion. With the empire stabilized, the next ruler would focus on securing its borders and asserting its dominance. Murad II ruled like a chess master, strategic, patient, and always thinking 2 moves ahead. Ascending the throne at 17, he faced immediate challenges. A pretender, Mustafa Çelebi, backed by the Byzantines, seized much of Rumelia. Murad swiftly quashed this threat, reasserting Ottoman dominance. In 1422, he laid siege to Constantinople, employing cannons, a relatively new military technology. However, internal strife forced him to lift the siege. Murad's reign was marked by significant military campaigns. He captured Thessaloniki from the Venetians in 1430, demonstrating Ottoman naval prowess. In a bold move, Murad abdicated in 1444, handing the throne to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II. But when a crusade threatened Ottoman territories, Murad returned to lead his forces to victory at the Battle of Varna. After a Janissary revolt in 1446, Murad resumed the throne, continuing his campaigns until his death in 1451. And speaking of triumphs, Murad's son would soon achieve one of the greatest victories in history. Before he was the conqueror, Mehmed II was a boy sultan who first ruled at just 12 years old, only to be forced aside by politics. But that early taste of power lit a fire. When he returned to the throne at 19, he was sharper, stronger, and determined. At just 21, Mehmed II achieved the unthinkable, the conquest of Constantinople in 1453.
If you're captivated by stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Ancient Perspectives for more epic tales of history's greatest figures and moments. Hit the bell icon to never miss an adventure into the past.
But his vision extended far beyond the city's walls. To revitalize the city, Mehmed initiated a massive repopulation effort, relocating diverse communities, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, from across his empire to Istanbul. He established the millet system, granting religious minorities autonomy under their own leaders, fostering a mosaic of cultures. A patron of the arts and sciences, Mehmed invited scholars from the Islamic world and Renaissance Europe to his court. He commissioned Gentile Bellini, a Venetian artist, to paint his portrait, symbolizing a bridge between East and West. Mehmed's legal reforms were groundbreaking. He codified criminal and civil laws into a unified code, laying the foundation for Ottoman jurisprudence. His reign wasn't just about conquest, it was about transformation. Mehmed turned Istanbul into a thriving capital, blending cultures, laws, and traditions, a legacy that would endure for centuries. But after such a high, the empire needed a steadying presence, and that came in the form of Mehmed's son. Bayezid II wasn't a conqueror, he was a cultivator. While his predecessors expanded borders, Bayezid expanded minds and hearts. In 1492, as Spain expelled its Jewish population, Bayezid dispatched the Ottoman navy under Admiral Kamal Reis to rescue them. He welcomed these refugees, granting them citizenship and religious freedom. He reportedly remarked, "You call Ferdinand a wise king, he who impoverishes his country and enriches mine." A polymath, Bayezid was fluent in multiple languages, including Greek and Italian. He was a poet, writing under the pen name Adli, and a patron of the arts and sciences. He even corresponded with Leonardo da Vinci, who proposed building a bridge over the Golden Horn. Yet his reign wasn't without turbulence. He faced internal rebellions and a fierce succession struggle with his son, Selim. Ultimately, Bayezid abdicated in 1512, paving the way for Selim's ascension. And speaking of Selim, this son would bring fire and fury to the empire like never before. Selim Yavuz, or the Grim, didn't just inherit an empire. He stormed into history with fire in his eyes and a sword in his hand. In just 8 years, he doubled the size of the Ottoman Empire, and not with diplomacy. In 1514, he crushed the Safavid Empire at the Battle of Chaldiran, seizing eastern Anatolia and sending a chilling message to the Shia world. But Selim wasn't done. He marched south and by 1517 obliterated the Mamluk Sultanate, annexing Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and most significantly, Mecca and Medina. This wasn't just a land grab, it was a spiritual takeover. By acquiring the holy cities, Selim became custodian of the 2 holy mosques, and for the first time, the Ottoman sultans claimed the title of caliph, supreme leader of the Muslim world. But Selim's iron will didn't stop at foreign enemies. He ruthlessly eliminated nearly all male members of his dynasty, including his brothers and nephews, in what historians now call one of the bloodiest consolidations of power in Ottoman history. And yet, this fierce warrior had a poetic side. He wrote elegant verses in Persian and Turkish under the name Selimi, and he patronized scholars and Sufi orders, even restoring key Islamic shrines in the newly conquered lands. Selim's reign was brief, brutal, and brilliant, a storm that cleared the path for the sun to rise. And that rising sun, his son, Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman I, known in the West as the Magnificent and in the East as Kanuni, or the Lawgiver, ascended the throne in 1520, ushering in the Ottoman Empire's zenith. His military campaigns were formidable, capturing Belgrade in 1521, Rhodes in 1522, and pushing into Hungary, culminating in the pivotal Battle of Mohacs in 1526. These victories expanded the empire's reach across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Beyond the battlefield, Suleiman was a visionary reformer. He codified a centralized legal system, the Qanun, harmonizing Islamic Sharia with imperial laws, ensuring justice and order across diverse territories. A patron of the arts, Suleiman's reign witnessed a cultural renaissance. He commissioned architect Mimar Sinan to design the Süleymaniye Mosque, an architectural masterpiece in Istanbul. Suleiman himself was an accomplished poet, writing under the pen name Muhibi, reflecting on themes of love and justice. His personal life defied convention. Suleiman's deep affection for Hürrem Sultan, a former concubine, led him to make her his legal wife, a rare move that shifted palace dynamics and influenced succession politics. Suleiman's 46-year reign left an indelible mark, blending military prowess, legal innovation, and cultural patronage. And with Suleiman's passing, the empire's fate rested on the shoulders of his successors. Selim II, son of Suleiman the Magnificent and Hürrem Sultan, had big shoes to fill, and instead of marching in them, he mostly lounged in slippers. Nicknamed Selim the Sot, he was the first Ottoman sultan who never led a campaign personally. A lover of poetry, women, and especially wine, Selim famously favored the grape so much that some historians joke he conquered Cyprus just for its vineyards. His reign, though short, was surprisingly stable, thanks to skilled statesmen like Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, who practically ran the empire. But Selim's era also saw a major blow. The naval defeat at Lepanto in 1571, the Ottomans' first real stumble at sea, even if they bounced back quickly. Despite his reputation, Selim II proved that delegation, not domination, can keep a throne warm. But the empire couldn't rely on lounging forever. Next came a sultan with fire in his blood and legacy on his mind. Murad III stepped onto the throne in 1574 and into a world of velvet shadows. He began his reign with a tragic necessity, the execution of 5 brothers, a chilling act meant to prevent civil war and one that haunted his reign. Though the empire continued to expand, pushing into the Caucasus and battling the Safavids, Murad himself rarely left the palace. Introspective and melancholic, he turned inward, channeling his energy into arts, poetry, and spiritual reflection. Under his watch, Ottoman culture flourished. Illuminated manuscripts, haunting music, and intricate miniatures filled the halls of Topkapi. But Murad wasn't ruling alone. His mother, Nurbanu Sultan, and later his wife, Safiye Sultan, held immense power, ushering in the influential era known as the Sultanate of Women. And beyond the palace, Murad built unlikely alliances, most notably with Queen Elizabeth I of England, exchanging letters that bridged empires through diplomacy and ink. But while Murad ruled from within a golden cage, his heir would burst forth with fire, fury, and fatal consequence. When Mehmed III took the throne in 1595, he followed in his father's grim footsteps, ordering the execution of 19 brothers, just as Murad had done. But unlike his father, Mehmed wasn't prepared for the burdens of war. Still, history called. In 1596, he shocked everyone by personally leading the army to the Battle of Kerestez, a rare move for an Ottoman sultan of the time. The battle was brutal, victory seemed impossible, until a sudden counterattack turned the tide. The Ottomans won, but Mehmed returned home shaken. Despite this triumph, he withdrew deeper into palace life, increasingly controlled by powerful court factions, especially his mother, Safiye Sultan, whose influence rivaled that of viziers. Culturally, his reign kept the empire's arts alive, but cracks were forming, within the court, the army, and the people's trust. As uncertainty grew, the next sultan would need to reclaim both discipline and direction to keep the empire intact. Ahmed I ascended the throne in 1603 at just 13 years old, becoming the 14th Ottoman Sultan, reigning for 14 years and passing away at 28, earning him the moniker the Sultan of 14s. Breaking from brutal tradition, he spared his brother Mustafa, ending centuries of royal fratricide, a decision that introduced uncertainty into the line of succession. Ahmed's reign was marked by military challenges, the Jalali revolts in Anatolia, and wars with the Habsburgs and Safavids. The Treaty of Zitvatarok in 1606 ended Austria's tribute payments, signaling a shift in Ottoman prestige. Yet Ahmed's legacy shines through his cultural and religious contributions. He commissioned the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, known as the Blue Mosque, completed in 1616. Beyond architecture, Ahmed was a patron of the arts, a poet, and a devout Muslim. He funded restorations of holy sites in Mecca and Medina, reinforcing the empire's Islamic identity. His personal life was equally impactful. His consort, Kösem Sultan of Greek origin, would become one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, influencing politics for decades. But after Ahmed's visionary yet turbulent reign, the empire would face instability under a ruler unprepared for the burdens of the throne. Mustafa I was never meant to rule. Hidden for years inside the cafes, the gilded cage where princes waited, sometimes for life, he emerged fragile and paranoid after the death of Sultan Ahmed I. Whispers say he mistook palace fish for spies and tore turbans off advisors mid-meeting. But here's the twist. Mustafa's ascent marked the end of fratricide. Ahmed I had spared his brothers, hoping mercy would bring peace. Instead, it opened the door to instability. And so the throne passed not by age or strength, but by confusion. In 1617, Mustafa became Sultan, but his reign was dominated by his mother, Kösem Sultan, and palace elites. With no real control and his mind slipping, the Janissaries quietly replaced him. Enter Osman II, the young lion. Just 14, but already burning with vision. Unlike his uncle, Osman was sharp, educated, and determined to break the power of the Janissaries who had meddled in royal succession. He launched reforms, planned a pilgrimage to Mecca to legitimize his rule, and even proposed creating a new loyal army from Anatolian tribes and Crimean Tatars. A direct threat to the Janissary elite. But ambition without caution is dangerous. In 1622, the Janissaries struck back. In one of the darkest chapters in Ottoman history, they stormed the palace, dragged the 18-year-old sultan through the streets, and executed him brutally, possibly by strangling with a bowstring. He became the first Ottoman sultan to be killed by his own troops, and in a bitter twist of irony, they reinstalled Mustafa I, a broken figurehead once again, while the empire spiraled. With the throne stained by betrayal and blood, and the 15th and 16th sultans, Mustafa and Osman, leaving behind madness and a martyrdom, the empire teetered on the edge. What it needed now was not another boy, nor a puppet, but a storm in human form. Murad IV didn't just inherit the throne, he inherited the trauma of a shattered empire. He was just 11 when he became sultan, in the shadow of the humiliation that was Osman II's brutal death and the chaos of his uncle Mustafa's erratic reign. His rule, a reckoning. As he grew, Murad transformed from a quiet boy into a force of nature. Tired of court intrigue and military disobedience, he seized power with an iron grip. He outlawed alcohol, tobacco, and coffee. Not just in law, but in action, stalking the streets of Istanbul in disguise and executing violators himself. His reign became a personal crusade to restore dignity and fear to the throne. But beneath the iron, there was art. Murad was a gifted poet and calligrapher. Still, it was war that defined his legacy. The capture of Baghdad in 1638, after years of brutal campaigning, reasserted Ottoman dominance in the east. His life burned fast and bright. Dead at 27, Murad left no heir, just a legacy of order born from vengeance. With the ghost of Osman finally avenged, the empire turned to Murad's brother, hoping blood would be enough to carry order forward. After Murad IV's storm came silence, and then Ibrahim. Known to history as Ibrahim the Mad, his reign is often painted with madness, but the truth is far more layered. Imprisoned for years under threat of execution by his own brother, Ibrahim emerged to rule a throne that felt more like a cage than a crown. Haunted by paranoia, he clung to palace favorites and mystics, while grand viziers ran the state. But make no mistake, his reign wasn't just whispers and shadows. Ibrahim oversaw major building projects and attempted naval expansion in the Mediterranean. Still, his obsessions grew dangerous. His fixation on a consort nicknamed Shekapare, Sugar Cube, became legendary, along with his lavish spending on fur and perfumes, even during wartime. Eventually, the cracks widened. The janissaries and court elites had had enough. In 1648, Ibrahim was deposed and later strangled in his cell, an end as tragic as his life. And so the fragile mind gave way to a new ruler, his young son, Mehmed IV, marking the start of one of the longest and most dramatic reigns in Ottoman history. Mehmed IV ascended the throne at just 6 years old, far too young to rule, but not too young to spark a war behind the curtain. Though he wore the crown, the real battle was between two formidable women, his mother, Turhan Sultan, and his grandmother, the legendary Kösem Sultan. Kösem returned to power as regent, but Turhan had other plans. In a brutal twist, Kösem was assassinated in 1651, strangled in the Topkapı Palace, marking the bloody end of one era and the rise of another. Raised on this backdrop of power games, Mehmed became a ruler obsessed with legacy. While he preferred the hunt to politics, earning him the nickname Avcı, or the Hunter, his reign wasn't idle. Under the guidance of brilliant grand viziers like Köprülü Mehmed Pasha and his son Fazıl Ahmed, the empire was revived, stretching deep into Central Europe and retaking Crete from Venice. But glory came with cracks. The failed siege of Vienna in 1683 marked a turning point. With defeat came dissent, and Mehmed IV was deposed, the first Ottoman sultan removed without bloodshed. He was the 19th sultan, but his fall echoed back to earlier turbulence, like that faced by the 16th Osman II. Now, the Ottomans would look to a new face to hold the crumbling center, his brother Suleiman II. After Mehmed IV's quiet fall, his brother Suleiman II, the 20th sultan, emerged from decades of palace seclusion. He had spent over 40 years confined in the cafes, never expecting to rule. But the empire was unraveling, and the moment called for a steady hand. Despite poor health and limited political experience, Suleiman surprised many. He empowered strong leadership, especially his Grand Vizier, Köprülü Fazıl Mustafa Pasha, who brought discipline back to the military and retook lost Balkan territories. Suleiman's reign, though brief, was a comeback story, proof that even from the shadows, a sultan could rise with purpose. But fate was unkind. In 1691, just 4 years into his reign, both he and his trusted vizier died, Suleiman of illness, his vizier in battle. Still, the revival they sparked lit a path forward. With the 20th Sultan's final breath, the throne passed again, this time to a brother who had watched it all from the margins. Enter Ahmed II. Ahmed II, the 21st Sultan, came to power at 47, old by Ottoman standards, and inherited an empire limping through crisis. Like his brother Suleiman II, Ahmed had spent most of his life in confinement, but now found himself wearing the crown at one of the empire's lowest points. The Ottomans were deep in the Great Turkish War against the Habsburgs, and the pressure was immense. Luckily, Ahmed retained Köprülü Mustafa Pasha's disciplined reforms. Under his command, the Ottomans scored a critical victory at the Battle of Slankamen, but it came at a cost. Mustafa Pasha was killed, and with him, the last great momentum of the war effort. Ahmed was no tyrant, but the strain showed. He ruled quietly, leaning on the bureaucracy, but made little lasting mark before dying in 1695. His reign felt like a pause, an empire catching its breath, uncertain of its next move. But the next sultan would bring youth, energy, and a bold new strategy to a tired old war machine. That sultan was Mustafa II. Mustafa II came to the throne young and determined to restore Ottoman glory. He was one of the last sultans to personally lead his army into battle, winning early victories like Zenta and reclaiming some lost territories. But just when the tide seemed to turn, it snapped. At the Battle of Zenta in 1697, the Ottomans were crushed by Prince Eugene of Savoy. Thousands perished, and Mustafa barely escaped. This loss forced the Ottomans to sign the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, surrendering large parts of Hungary and signaling a major territorial retreat. It was the first time the empire ceded such vast lands to European powers, a psychological shift that shook the Ottomans' self-image as invincible. Mustafa tried to reform the military and limit the Janissaries' power, but his top-down approach alienated the very people he needed. In 1703, the army mutinied in the Edirne event, deposing him in favor of his brother. With Mustafa II's fall, the 23rd Sultan would usher in a strange calm, one defined more by poetry and gardens than conquest. Ahmed III, the 23rd Ottoman Sultan, rose to power after a Janissary-led uprising toppled his predecessor. His reign ushered in the Tulip Era, a time of peace, poetry, and porcelain, where Istanbul flirted with European styles and high society embraced art, gardens, and the printing press. But beneath the elegance was tension. While Ahmed loved refinement, commissioning libraries, fountains, and even embracing diplomacy, the empire's enemies didn't pause. His passive stance during the 1711 Pruth River campaign stunned many, though it ended surprisingly well. Still, what began as a golden spring slowly wilted. The people grew restless as opulence flourished for the elite. By 1730, the Patrona Halil revolt exploded. A strange mix of barbers, butchers, and angry Janissaries stormed the palace. Ahmed, once the face of a cultural renaissance, was forced to abdicate, replaced by Mehmed I. His reign, a mirror reflecting both the beauty and the fragility of imperial indulgence. Mehmed I, the 24th Ottoman Sultan, didn't come to power through grandeur, he came through crisis. After the violent Patrona Halil revolt ousted his uncle Ahmed III, Mehmed ascended the throne in chaos, with rebels literally inside the palace. For weeks he ruled under their watchful eyes, a puppet in theory but not in spirit. Quietly and patiently, Mehmed rebuilt authority, had the rebels eliminated, and restored royal control. Despite lacking military brilliance, Mehmed's reign marked a restoration of dignity. He faced major European wars, including conflicts with Austria and Russia, yet managed to secure relatively favorable peace deals. While the empire was no longer invincible, Mahmud's rule proved it was still standing. A patron of poetry and architecture, he was dubbed the Poet Sultan, often writing under the name Sebkati. His legacy? A reign that didn't roar but steadied, proof that survival too can be a kind of strength. Osman III, the 25th Sultan, is one of the most mysterious figures to wear the Ottoman crown. Why? Because he spent over 50 years in the cafes, the palace's gilded cage for princes, before unexpectedly becoming sultan in his late 50s. Decades of isolation shaped him into a reserved, almost paranoid ruler. He hated music, banned it in the palace, and reportedly had the floors padded so he wouldn't hear footsteps. But beneath the quirks was a cautious reformer. He restructured the military administration and quietly removed corrupt officials, moves that didn't make headlines but improved governance. He was also the last sultan buried in the tomb of Sultan Suleiman, a subtle nod to continuity even in quiet reigns. Osman III's story reminds us not every sultan reigned with thunder, some ruled from the shadows with quiet corrections that mattered. Mustafa III came to power with big ambitions. The empire had fallen behind Europe, and he knew it. Unlike many of his predecessors, Mustafa was deeply invested in science and modernization. He founded the Imperial School of Naval Engineering, a bold step toward creating a modern Ottoman navy. He also tried reforming the military and bureaucracy, but here's the catch: he lacked the institutional muscle to push things through. His frustration was visible. He once lamented that his empire was like a ship with a broken rudder. As the Russo-Turkish War broke out in 1768, he found himself unprepared, fighting a modern Russia with an outdated army. Still, he kept pushing, working late into the night, personally reviewing reports, trying to salvage an empire slipping through his fingers. When he died suddenly in 1774, it wasn't just the end of a reign. It was the end of one of the last sultans who truly tried to drag the empire into a new era with sheer willpower. But as Mustafa fell, his half-brother rose, a softer soul thrust into a storm. Abdülhamid I inherited more than just a throne. He inherited a shattered empire. The ink was barely dry on the humiliating Treaty of Küçük Kaynarca, which not only gave Crimea to Russia, but also allowed the Russians to claim they were protectors of Orthodox Christians within Ottoman lands, a dangerous precedent. But Abdülhamid wasn't a warrior. He was a pious, kind-hearted reformer, more comfortable with books and prayers than swords. Still, he tried. He began modernizing the army and building new barracks, started rethinking finances, and even showed early signs of humanitarian care, opening up imperial soup kitchens for the poor. He also reintroduced the Taimar land system, attempting to restore some kind of rural stability. And despite personal grief, he lost many of his children during plagues. Abdülhamid carried the weight of leadership quietly. He died heartbroken after hearing of another catastrophic military loss to Russia. But his reign, though often overlooked, showed the human side of sultanship, a man trying to bring warmth and stability in an age of crumbling power. With Abdülhamid's quiet fall, the empire turned once again to ambition, this time in the form of his nephew, the fiery and controversial Selim III. Selim III was a reformer born too early, a poet and intellectual who wanted to rewrite the Ottoman script. Disturbed by the empire's decline, he launched the bold Nizam-i-Sedid, the New Order, introducing European-style military training, new uniforms, and a treasury to match. Few know he personally composed music and exchanged letters with Napoleon. But his modern dreams clashed with old power. The Janissaries, once protectors of the realm, had become deeply conservative and saw reform as betrayal. Religious elites echoed that fear. As the walls closed in, Selim found himself trapped in the very palace he hoped to renew. By 1707, a violent coup ended it all. He was deposed and eventually assassinated by order of a successor he never expected. Yet his fall wasn't the final note. The next act would be written in fire by men shaped by his vision and shaken by his fate. Mustafa IV's reign was born from betrayal. Installed after the ousting of his cousin Selim III, he quickly proved a puppet of the old guard. The Janissaries pulled the strings, and the empire spiraled deeper into crisis. But in just 1 year, the tide turned again. A reformist army led by Mustafa Bayraktar stormed Istanbul, aiming to restore Selim. Fearing his own replacement, Mustafa IV ordered the execution of both Selim and his brother Mahmud. Selim was killed, but Mahmud escaped, hiding behind palace walls in a legendary scene where a servant broke through a furnace wall to save him. Mustafa's betrayal sealed his fate. Mahmud emerged, crowned Sultan, and had Mustafa executed. It was poetic justice and a bloody reckoning. Now the 30th Sultan, Mahmud II, would carry the weight of 2 assassinated cousins and a broken empire. And he'd answer with fire and reform. Mahmud II didn't inherit a throne. He inherited a battlefield. After surviving a palace assassination plot, he ruled like a man who knew how fragile the crown really was. His reign was defined by one thunderous act, the destruction of the Janissaries in 1826, known as the Auspicious Incident. These elite soldiers had become a corrupt political force, and Mahmud crushed them with cannon fire, literally, ending centuries of their dominance overnight. But Mahmud wasn't just a destroyer, he was a builder. He modernized the military, wore Western clothes, and replaced turbans with fezzes as part of his sweeping reforms. He launched the first Ottoman census, restructured ministries, and laid the groundwork for modern education. In many ways, Mahmud II was the architect of the Ottoman Empire's second wind, forging a path between tradition and transformation. But reform always comes at a price, and Mahmud's son would inherit both his father's vision and the backlash it triggered. Abdülhamid I stepped onto the throne with a pen in one hand and a vision in the other. Just 16 when he became Sultan, he issued the Tanzimat Fermani, 1839, a bold declaration of sweeping reforms that promised equality before the law for all subjects, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. It was a radical shift, aimed at modernizing the empire and preserving its crumbling edges in a changing world. Under his reign, Ottoman subjects saw new secular schools, a reformed tax system, and the empire's first official newspapers. He even oversaw the construction of Dolmabahce Palace, a European-style masterpiece that replaced the old Topkapi as the seat of power, a literal symbol of East meeting West. But while his reforms won applause abroad, they stirred anxiety at home. Many traditionalists saw them as erosion of Islamic identity. And with such drastic change, the stage was set for a future struggle between progress and preservation, one his brother would soon inherit. Abdulaziz ruled with grandeur, an empire builder who dazzled Europe with lavish palaces, luxurious voyages, and grand state visits. He was the first Ottoman Sultan to travel extensively abroad, opening diplomatic doors from Paris to London. His era saw massive modernization projects. Railways, telegraphs, and the navy expanded to unprecedented size. But behind the glitter, trouble brewed. The empire's finances spiraled into debt, burdened by costly ambitions and inefficient bureaucracy. Meanwhile, nationalist movements flared across the Balkans, threatening to tear the empire apart. Abdulaziz's lavish spending only deepened unrest and resentment. His reign ended abruptly when he was found dead under mysterious circumstances, officially ruled a suicide, but many whispered of palace intrigue. After a reign of both splendor and shadow, the empire's fate now rested in the hands of a sultan facing an impossible crossroads. Murad V's reign was like a flicker, barely 3 months on the throne before his mental health forced his removal. Known for his liberal views, he aimed to continue his predecessor's reformist efforts, supporting constitutional monarchy and freedoms. But his fragile psyche, likely worsened by imprisonment and palace stress, made ruling impossible. His brief time in power was overshadowed by intrigue and uncertainty. Deposed and confined to the Churayan Palace, Murad became a symbol of the empire's mounting struggles, caught between reform and decay. And from this delicate moment stepped a man determined to restore order, his brother, the 34th Sultan, who would face the empire's darkest hour. Abdülhamid II took the throne amid chaos, promising to save the empire from collapse. He suspended the fledgling constitution, ruling with a tight grip and a vast spy network, earning the nickname the Red Sultan. His reign was marked by both repression and modernization. Railways like the famous Hejaz Railway connected distant provinces, but political dissent was crushed ruthlessly. He skillfully played the great powers against each other, maintaining Ottoman sovereignty for over 3 decades. Yet internally, tensions simmered. The empire became a powder keg of ethnic uprisings and nationalist movements, while Abdülhamid's paranoia deepened. By the time the Young Turks forced his removal, the empire was a shadow of its former self, but still standing. After decades of iron-fisted rule, the stage was set for dramatic change, and a new generation ready to reshape the empire's destiny. Mehmed V ascended as a figurehead during a turbulent era. With the Young Turks holding real power, his reign was marked by the empire's struggle to modernize while facing internal divisions. He presided over the empire's entry into World War I, a conflict that would prove catastrophic. Though not a warrior sultan himself, Mehmed's symbolic role was important, rallying the Muslim world behind the Ottoman cause. But the war unleashed unprecedented devastation. Military defeats, famine, and the tragic Armenian genocide stained his reign. By 1918, the empire was on its knees, its centuries-long story nearing an end. With the empire crumbling, a new leader would rise from the ashes, determined to forge a different future. Mehmed VI ruled the Ottoman Empire's final chapter amid collapse and occupation. From 1918 to 1922, he faced the impossible, an empire carved up by allied powers and nationalist uprisings spreading across Anatolia. His authority weakened as Istanbul was occupied and the Ottoman realm unraveled. In 1922, the Sultanate was officially abolished, ending more than 600 years of Ottoman rule. Mehmed VI was sent into exile, marking the close of the Sultan's long reign. With the empire gone, Turkey's future was set on a new path. But the legacy of the 36 Ottoman sultans had already shaped centuries of history, culture, and empire. And that brings us to the end of the Sultan's saga, an era of conquest, culture, and complexity that still fascinates the world today.